Hello out there, and welcome to a new episode of Books and Beyond from the Winter Park Library, recorded live in the recording studio at the library in beautiful Winter Park, Florida. In Books and Beyond, we have conversations with writers, musicians, artists, presenters, and other contributors. Most of our guests have appeared live at the Winter Park Library or will be presenting soon. We hope you'll subscribe to the Books and Beyond podcast and that you'll stay up to date with library goings-on at winterparklibrary.org/events. That's winterparklibrary.org/events. I'm Michael Werner, and I'll be your host for our interviews. Enjoy the show. Hello out there, library patrons, readers, and smart people everywhere. This is Michael Werner. I'm welcoming you to the Winter Park Library's Books and Beyond podcast. Today we have a special guest, but before I get there, let me mention to you that all events here in the library are featured on the website, and the best way to find them, including our guest presentations today, is to go to winterparklibrary.org/events. That's winterparklibrary.org/events. So today's guest is Rick Kilby. Rick has been described to me by one of the librarians here as a Renaissance man. That's very true.
Who said that?
I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to tell you. He's in this room, but Rick is an artist, designer, and Florida historian, and he's here specifically to talk about his background in general, a lot of those things. We'd like to hear about his background. But then we're going to focus a little bit on some research that he's been doing through something called the Smith Grant that he'll be presenting here. I believe it's on May 2nd at 2 p.m. And again, you can find that at the winterparklibrary.org/events, and you can sign up there. It's a free event, but it's best to sign up ahead of time to secure your spot. So welcome, Rick.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Glad to have you. Before we get into the grants and all the official things you do, tell us a little bit about your background, where you came from, and what got you to this point in life.
I grew up in Gainesville, went to the University of Florida, got a degree in graphic design. I worked at a direct marketing firm for about 18 months and then moved to Orlando, worked for another direct marketing firm doing direct mail, which is basically junk mail.
I remember direct mail. I was involved with direct mail for a long time myself.
Were you?
Yeah. We can talk about that later.
And then I started working at Church Street Station, and that really changed my life. I worked there close to a decade. As the art director, I started working in the historic train station in the attic. And that's where my love of history grew, in that historic building. And, that block is full of historic artifacts and in historic buildings. And after that, I worked for a golf company for about 3 years, and then I started my own business, Kilby Creative, in 2000, at the very end of 2000. So a lot of my clients have been museums. I've been doing work for the Orange County Regional History Center for 25 years now. And that has allowed me to pursue my passion for writing about Florida history.
Okay. And that work that you do for people is history or is graphic design?
It's graphic design.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm a graphic designer. That's how I make a living. The writing stuff, it doesn't produce enough income at this point.
Not a big market for Florida historian writings, right? Yeah.
No, I'm not. No J.K. Rowling.
Yeah.
But I love it. I keep finding more and more stories that, once you fall down the rabbit hole, you keep finding more, and it kind of feeds that desire to learn, more stories that are out there.
Uh-huh. What was your original interest in graphic design? How did that come about?
I always loved art as a kid. I used to draw. My mom said, they could just give me a crayon and a piece of paper and I'd be fine, and they could just leave me alone. And so I took art lessons when I was a kid, and I took art lessons in high school. And I really didn't even know what graphic design was when I started college. I had this strange idea I was going to major in chemistry, and I took one class and realized that wasn't for me.
Yeah.
But then somebody told me about the graphic design program, and then I realized that's what I loved. That's what I've been doing. I remember, designing stuff in high school, not knowing I was doing graphic design. And so, I think I've done it long enough. It's actually 40 years since I graduated from high school this year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, graduated from college, I should say.
Okay.
And, it has its I love pure design itself. The challenge is trying to maintain a sense of your own creativity while trying to satisfy the client. And that's always kind of a challenge. And that's one of the things that got me into writing, was the ability to design my own books and be my own client.
Okay.
So I've designed all my own books.
Okay. Well, tell us in general about some of those books and what you do write about.
My first one was called Finding the Fountain of Youth. It was published in 2013. It was a kind of tracing the myth of the Fountain of Youth. So it starts with Ponce de Leon and the real person, and then how he affected the development of Florida. And he kind of became a culture icon, I call him the original Florida man. And, it was low-hanging fruit to use him to market anything for Florida. And so I found all these vintage advertising using Ponce de Leon. So a lot of it is, I'm a collector at heart, and I started collecting pieces of ephemera with Ponce or the Fountain of Youth. And at some point I had to do something with this collection, and I wanted to, I designed this book. It was going to be a museum exhibit at one point, and it actually did turn into a museum exhibit, but that's where it started. And then, of course, it led me to springs, and because every spring at some point or another claimed to be the Fountain of Youth. And so then I started collecting information about springs history, and then I got involved with springs advocacy right as that was happening, because the ecology of our springs has changed a lot in the last 20, 30 years. And right as that, there was kind of a movement involving trying to create more awareness of the situation in our springs, I was writing my book, and I just kind of fell into it.
Tell me a little bit more, tell us a little bit more about that, the ecology aspect of
well, there's Florida is growing exponentially. It's the third largest state in terms of population now, and that happened actually as I was working on that project.
Isn't that amazing, by the way, in your lifetime to see that happen from maybe the 15th largest when you were a kid? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, one of the reasons I'm doing this is in my lifetime, I've seen the springs change. I remember going to Silver Springs, and all you would see this beautiful green eelgrass and this sugar white sand on the bottom, and now it's just gunky slime. But, there's two causes. As the state has grown, imagine the aquifer underneath the state. Like, imagine the state looks like a big piece of Swiss cheese, and in the pot, those little holes is water. And that's where we get it's the Floridan aquifer. Most of our drinking water comes from the aquifer. And there's more people here sucking out more water, so the aquifer levels are lower. And there's more people with more lawns putting fertilizer on it, and it eventually all runs down into the aquifer and into our springs. So there's less flow, and there's more pollutants getting in there, so that means more algae blooms, and more algae blooms mean the plants that are supposed to survive at our springs struggle because they're covered with algae. And there's less water coming out of the springs, so the algae doesn't get pushed downstream like it used to, and so it kind of accumulates and things die off, and it affects all the life in the springs.
Rick, we're not good caretakers of our land, are we?
No, not at all.
Springs.
Not at all.
Yeah, we could probably spend a good amount of time talking about that. We'll try to avoid some of it, but yeah. Okay, so you talked about you started with your Ponce de Leon book.
Yes.
And what else have you written about in Florida history?
So as I was writing that and promoting that book, I was doing talks. I was starting to see places in Florida history that had springs that were utilized in the 19th century as spas, health spas, where people came to take the waters, and that means soaking in and drinking the waters. And I noticed that that era was mentioned in other books, but there had never been a book devoted strictly to that phenomena.
Okay.
So I found about 24 springs throughout the state that had these beautiful Victorian hotels built near the springs, and that were places where, originally they would come down on steamboat. They would, mostly after the Civil War, they would come into Jacksonville on a big ocean liner, and then get onto a smaller steamboat and go up the St. Johns River, and there was these springs with these beautiful hotels where people could bathe and take the water, because back then it was a really big deal for Americans to take the waters. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to chronicle them, and I wanted to tell their stories, because each of these places had a very fascinating story, how they developed, and then what happened to them. Most of them were built out of wood and ended up burning down. But
do any of them still exist?
So there are. I always say there's 3 places you can still take the waters in Florida. Green Cove Springs near St. Augustine. It's the water comes out of a spring there and goes into a swimming pool, and it's open seasonally. In Safety Harbor, which is near Clearwater in Pinellas County, there's a spa there that comes from 5 separate springs, and you can take the waters there. And then there's a wonderful place called Warm Mineral Springs in Sarasota County, where it's for the most part undeveloped, and there's this big, it's a very different spring. It's not the crystal clear blue spring. It kind of is greenish looking, but there's a high concentration of minerals, and it's mostly Eastern Europeans who go there every day to take the waters.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, so the largest population of people from the Ukraine is in this little town called Northport, Florida.
And what's it called?
Warm Mineral Springs.
Warm Mineral
and it's
Springs.
in Northport, Florida.
Okay.
And so
I've never heard of that. Yeah.
Most people haven't. There's a charge. It's owned by the city. It was owned by the county. But the first time I went, there was a little cafe there, and they had stuff like borscht on the menu because there were a lot of Russians and Eastern Europeans who liked that kind of cuisine. And there's a little motel nearby with all these flags from Germany and different countries because that's who their customer base was. And they believe that that water has powers. For a while, that spring closed, and people were picketing because they couldn't get to their spring.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. You've used the term "take the waters." What does that mean?
Taking the waters generally means soaking in spring water and drinking the spring water. And so at these places in the 19th century, they had a whole regimen. You would get up early and start drinking the spring water. Then you'd go and bathe. And then you come out and you drink more. And then there was a lot of social activity involved. So they would usually have music. There were bands that would play. You would promenade. There was places you could walk and wearing your best clothes to be seen by others. There's a big social component. Some places had horse racing. Some places had croquet. The Green Cove Springs and White Sulphur Springs or White Springs were two towns that kind of grew up around the springs in order for people to go there. So they would have movie theaters eventually and all the kind of amenities that people would need in order to, because these were fairly affluent people to travel to Florida in the 19th century. You had to have money.
Yeah. And do any of the actual structures still exist, the original structures, or are they mostly all
very few? White Springs, which is in North Florida, just off I-75, there's kind of the foundation of the spring house. So there's these kind of cast concrete structure around the spring, and then there's this one kind of balcony going around the top. It was 4 levels at one point. Now it's only 1 level. Then further upstream, there's the basin of another spring house at Swanee Springs. There's some little structures at one called Panacea Springs. There's one. Well, I guess some of the architecture at Green Cove Springs still exists from that era, and there's one house that was part of a hotel called the Clarendon Hotel, and they would have guest house as well as the big main building, and that house still exists. So there's a scattering. In Safety Harbor, they built a spa there in the 1920s in the Mediterranean.
That's the one near Clearwater?
That's the one near Clearwater.
Yeah.
They added on in the mid-20th century, but the original building there from the 1920s still exists. And it's really interesting because there's pictures of this place, and there's like 5 or 6 different springs, and each one supposedly healed a different thing. So if you had like kidney issues, you went to one. If you had liver issues, you went to another, so and so and so. And there was a big sign right over where you would get the drinking water, and that sign still exists in the spa today. It's just downstairs in the beauty salon. And if you look in the beauty salon, through this plexiglass thing in the floor, you can see pipes coming up where they pipe the water in from the spring.
Interesting. I remember I did not grow up here in Florida, but I remember coming to Florida as a kid to see an aunt who lived here. And I remember the waters everywhere we went always smelled. They had the big, strong sulfur smell, which I guess in urban areas is long gone now.
Yeah.
Because it's been filtered out. Do springs have that smell?
Some of them, and that was desirable.
It is sulfur, right?
Yeah. It's sulfur hydrate or sulfur. It's one of those compounds.
It's the rotten egg smell.
Yeah. And I'm not a chemist.
Yeah.
See, I should have used the chemistry more. Yeah. But it is a compound of sulfur, and there are still Green Cove Springs. That smell is very strong the whole time, and that's what they look for. They didn't want these big, springs like Silver Springs. They wanted the smaller springs that you could tell there were minerals in, because that's what they believed would heal you.
Right.
A lot of these people were consumptives who had tuberculosis, and they came here. But there are a number of springs, and the interesting thing is, there is a special kind of bacteria that lives off of the sulfur, and so there are places at certain springs where you can smell that smell, where you'll see this long filamentous algae with this white stuff on it, and the white stuff eats the sulfur. It's a special kind of bacteria that eats the sulfur, which is really fascinating, and you can see it in a certain number of springs, and you usually smell it.
Yeah. It's a strong smell.
Yeah, it is.
It was very odd for me as a kid to smell that.
Yeah, there are a lot of people who believe that if you drink it, it keeps the mosquitoes away, but I found no evidence of that at all.
Okay, I wish that were true. Any other books you want to talk about before we go on to something else?
Well, I've been featured. I had an article about taking the waters, and Florida Humanities had a big compilation that came out for their 60th anniversary a couple years ago, and I had an article in that, and it's a great book. And then, my Smith Grant project has become a book.
Okay.
So,
okay. And we'll get into that in just a moment. We're doing a podcast.
Yes.
You also have your own podcast, I
Yes.
think, right? That's what I heard.
Yes.
What's that about?
So there's another, my publisher is University Press of Florida, and there's
Okay.
another UPF writer named Kathy Celestri, and she started a podcast called The Florida Spectacular, which is the title of her second book, and she invited me to be co-host. So we record once a week, and we just get people to talk about Florida stuff. We get a lot of Florida authors, and we talk about different things. We had...
So not necessarily history.
No,
could
not
be current
necessarily
events or-
history. Yeah. Just, anything related to Florida. We had somebody cancel on us this week, so we talked about Florida women. So my co-host talked about 3 Florida women, and I talked about 3 Florida women. And, that's the kind of things we do. We like to have authors because we like to amplify people who are coming out with books and help them because we know what it's like
Right.
to get out there.
Stuff.
So, yeah. But anybody interesting, so if you've got any guests you want to recommend, we're always looking for
Okay.
good
Well,
guests.
we do have some Florida connections on the podcast. Yeah, we can talk about that. Talk about that later.
Okay, great.
Yeah, we do have. Okay, let's start talking about some of your other work outside of your writing. Well, let me ask you another question before we get into the writing. Tell me a little bit about your writing process and when do you write? Where do you write? How do you write?
Well,
Rick Kilby writer. Let's talk about that for a
I
minute.
love the research. I love the research most of all. And, I'm a very visual person, so the writing itself to me sometimes seems like a foreign language because I'm, the visual nature of things is my first language. So part of what I love to do is when I design my books is really feature big imagery, because I think that's really important. But when I start doing the research, I find these stories, and so the research phase involves, clipping articles and keeping them so when I come back to write it, I know I can find them right away, taking notes, and then processing. And so then I start to write. When I start to write, I wake up very early in the morning. I start with an outline, and then I always say I write myself into a box. I write for usually an hour and a half until I don't know where I'm going next.
Okay.
And then I take a walk. And then usually on my walk, more things will come to me. I'll use my voice feature on my phone and speak it in there, and then get home and, put it on my computer, and then take off from that point the next day. So, I'm kind of do a little bit, get stuck, and then find a way out of that, and then write the next day. And so it's very difficult for me to have a big block of time where I could write uninterrupted. So like an hour and a half a day, every single day is the best way for me to do it.
Okay.
And then I edit, and then I edit again, and then I edit again, and then I usually send it out to an editor.
Okay.
When I'm ready.
Yeah. Okay. Do you have a current project?
Well, I'm just wrapping up the grant.
Okay. Yeah. We'll get.
But
to
I
it.
think
Yeah.
will lead to more things. There are some of the artists that I talk about that I would like to do more with, and I think I will take more. A big part of this is the public speaking part, and so one of the artists who's featured in my book will. I'm doing a talk about her, an artist
Okay.
named Joy Postal. So I need to create that, and we'll see what happens with that. There's always ideas. There's just not enough time for all the ideas.
Yeah. Oh boy. Well, Rick, I don't know if you know what that means, but to us that signals something, and it means it's time for rapid fire Q&A. And for our audience, our listeners, this is a chance for us to get to know you a little bit as a person,
Okay.
aside from your work. So we're going to fire some questions at you, and feel free to pass if you don't want to answer some of them, or just answer quick answer, or
Okay.
just in a sentence or two or a word or two. Success is
Freedom, being able to do what you want to do when you want to do it.
okay. I should have.
I'm going to pass on that. That's a good one, though.
Okay. Well,
We can come back to
we'll
that.
come back to that one. Okay.
Okay.
Do you have a morning ritual? And if you do, what is it?
Drink coffee, and then I do creative stuff. Either I make art or I write first thing in the morning.
Okay.
every day.
Right when you get up.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
What kind of coffee do you like?
Just regular coffee out of a coffee maker. I'm not a coffee snob.
Okay. What's a character trait you admire in others?
Honesty. Honesty. Yes, for sure.
What advice would you give to the 20-year-old Rick?
Just to relax and not spend so much time obsessing about chasing women, because 20 years from now you're going to get married.
That's good advice. If this thing had 0 calories but very high nutritional value, what is a food that you could eat every day? Or
Chocolate chip cookies.
Chocolate chip cookies.
Without a doubt.
Every day.
Yeah, I already had one this morning.
Okay. Do you make your own?
No, my wife made some. It was our anniversary yesterday, so she made some cookies.
Okay. If you had a paid, all expenses paid, 1-hour shopping spree, where would you go?
Probably the Apple Store.
Okay. Is there some place that's on your must-see list?
I need to get back to South Florida because there's places I want to research there, and I really want to take the train to see the Norton Art Gallery in Palm Beach. That's next on my list. That will happen after my grant presentation.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you hadn't followed this path that you've been on career-wise, with graphics and graphic art and writing, what else might have you ended up doing?
Doing art. I'd love to make art. I do ceramics, and people are like, I didn't know you had this in you, and it's like I've always known I've had it in me. I've just been trying to make a living, and it kind of annoying. I mean, tamping it down because I just haven't had the time to work on it.
Yeah, and when you say ceramics, is that pottery or is that?
It's sculpture. It's
sculpture. Okay, more sculpture.
Yeah, hand built sculpture.
Okay. Do you have a favorite saying or quote?
Right now, this is one I came up with: "Make space for grace." Just trying to create a vacuum in my mind so that creativity can come in.
My music tastes are
old school. We listened the other day. We drove back from Ocala and we listened to Steely Dan the whole way.
That's great, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yes, it is very fun.
Old music. Well, that's it for the rapid fire Q&A. But I'll come back to the one we passed on if you want to fill it in. I should have.
Gosh. I try not to live in that space of regret. I know that there are times where I have regret, and it's good that I can't answer, I suppose.
Yeah,
so
that is good. That is good, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for being a good sport on that and answering some of our rapid-fire questions. So let's go on to the next part of your life and why you're here today, or one of the reasons you're here today, and let's talk about your grant.
Okay.
The Smith Grant, right? I think it's called.
Yes.
So talk about the grant and what you're doing and why you're doing it.
It's really an honor. I was doing a talk at Casa Feliz in the fall, and I was researching the year 1933, the year the building was built, and I came across one of the former winners of the Smith Grant.
Tell us about Casa Feliz real quickly.
Casa Feliz is a historic home museum. It's called the Barber House originally, and it was built right on the lake, and they started to knock it down in the community.
Lake Virginia, right? Is it Virginia?
It's Virginia or Osceola.
Okay.
And they, the community did not want it torn down, so they actually picked the house up and moved it, and it's right next to the golf course, and now it operates as a venue and a historic home museum.
Okay.
And so they have a parlor series where they do talks about every month, and the executive director asked me and Joy Dickinson to do a talk about what happened in 1933, and I came across this wonderful Smith Grant paper about Winter Park during the Depression and how it survived and all the individuals involved. And that was my first time running across it. And as
so you didn't know.
I didn't know about it at all. And then since then, I've done my research for my own project. I keep running across them, and they're great little snippets of important stories in Winter Park. And it's wonderful that the Smiths created this because it's really well done research. Peter Schreier, documented Hannibal Square with photographs. Fairleigh Livingston wrote about the two black aldermen who were elected during Reconstruction. Rick Fogelsong wrote about moving I-4 further north. All these great papers, and I've used them all in my own research.
Okay, and your project now is what?
Shaping a sense of space, shaping a sense of place, historic murals, and the aesthetic character of Winter Park.
Okay.
And so I realized earlier that I've always been interested in historic murals, going back from my first book, because I kept running across them. And I don't mean the murals you see everywhere on every side of the building, but murals that have a sense of history, that were done by significant artists and have somehow survived the test of time. And so I write about 6 of them in my project. And really, basically,
I'm not even aware of any. What are those?
okay. So we'll start in the order of my book. First one is in Rollins College in Casa Iberia.
Okay.
It's it was originally a house that was for the Spanish program, and they hired a
Spanish language.
They one of the things I learned is that Rollins originally taught French as a second language, but in the 20th century they shifted away from French to Spanish, and they wanted someplace to be the center of all that activity because they had a French house, they wanted a Spanish house.
Okay.
So that's what it became. And they hired an artist who was called kind of the Bird Lady, and she moved here in the late 30s, named Joy Postal. And she did this wonderful mural. It's takes up the entire wall. It's in a hallway of flamingos, and there's the outline of North and Central and South America behind them.
Okay.
And it was done in 1945. Well, it's 44, 45.
It's very interesting.
And I knew she had done a mural at Rollins because, I've known about this artist and researched her since 2009, but I had never seen it until this summer. And for some reason in my mind, it was just small little painting of a ship, and I don't know where I got that information. When I saw it, I was blown away because it's enormous and it's beautiful. I mean, the flamingos are larger than life and spectacular, and you would never know it's there.
And what's the name of the building that it's in?
Casa Iberia.
Casa Iberia. Okay.
It's on Holt.
Okay.
It's a tiny little. It was a house. They bought it. They bought this lady's house, and that's the interesting story. Is the lady wanted more money than it was worth, and so they were trying to work out the details. And before the board had even approved the expenditure to buy the house, they had already raised enough money to buy the house, and they didn't want to give the money back, so they went ahead and bought it. The next one I write about is in a private home. There's another artist who I've been really interested in since 2009 named Sam Stoltz, and he was a builder / artist. He came here from Chicago, and he also loved birds. He was known as the world's greatest poultry painter for a while, and he built houses all over Central Florida. And he had this technique he created where he would take plaster and kind of sculpt it in a 3-dimensional way and then paint on it and do murals on the exterior and interior of the houses. And so he actually lived here in Winter Park. His house burned down after he died in the 1960s, but recently a homeowner was remodeling their house, and they removed this mirror from above the fireplace and found this incredible mural of this 3-dimensional largemouth bass.
So it was covered up.
It was covered up.
Somebody had covered it.
They had heard rumors that it was there, but they weren't sure until they removed the drywall and this mirror, and then it was there. And his houses, if you're into this stuff like I am, his houses are pretty well known. They're kind of Storybrooke looking. Some are kind of Tudor looking. There's 2 left in Winter Park, but there's maybe a half dozen in Mount Plymouth. There were some in Windermere. Jim Henson, actually, his family owned Sam Stoltz's house.
Okay.
There's a handful in College Park. There's the Dubs Dread Clubhouse. So his murals were very, just a very interesting, unique style. Realistic, but also the background was almost treated like a Jackson Pollock painting in some places. Very kind of drippy painting. And there's just a handful left. But he was well known at the time locally.
Yes. Okay. And others?
You probably driven past it on Pennsylvania, the Big Bad Wolf mural on the Winter Park Day Nursery. It's a mosaic.
Okay.
And Little Red Riding Hood, the Big Bad. At one point, that whole thing was removed and restored tile by tile by tile.
Wow.
And it was really hard. That artist is a guy named Don Sill. I couldn't find out much about him except for that he was one of the people who started the Winter Park Sidewalk Art Show. There was 3 guys. They got together. One of the people was the owner of the Barbizon restaurant, and they met there for coffee, and they said, let's do an art show. And, they announced it in February, and they had it in March in 1960. And so that's probably his biggest impact on Winter Park because he's one of those guys who did mosaics and ceramics, and he's not treated in the same category as a fine artist. Back then, they were considered crafts people. And so I would see newspaper articles of him winning awards for crafts, and I know there's more of his work out there. I just haven't been able to track it down.
Okay.
But I think that's become kind of a landmark in Winter Park. A lot of people say it's like welcome to Winter Park when you're driving up Pennsylvania. You see that, you're about to cross the railroad tracks and go into Winter Park.
Yeah.
So that's part of the significance of that. And then the Winter Park Post Office murals, there's actually 2. They're mosaics.
Okay.
by Joe Testaseca, who was a well-known artist in the mid-century from the Tampa area.
I got to tell you, Rick, I guess my eyes are not open. I mean, I know all these places you're talking about, but I'm just not. I'm not paying attention. I guess I'm not looking up. You know.
Well,
have
I've
to look
known
around.
about that
Yeah.
because it's they've talked about getting rid of the post office several times, and I think it's probably inevitable at some point that piece of property will be incorporated into Central Park. I just want them to preserve the murals because in Tampa Bay, where this artist is from, he's beloved. And at one point, they had one of his mosaics, very similar to the one that's on the side of the post office here. They took it off the building, demolished the building, built a new building, and put the mural back up.
Okay.
At great cost and expense because that's how much they revere his work.
Yeah. Yeah.
He was very well known in the 1960s and 70s, and he just died a few years ago. A very interesting guy. He was he taught at the University of Tampa for about 30 years, so he influenced a lot of people. He was a medical illustrator during the Korean conflict. And something happened as he was sketching an operating room. Some lamp swung around and had a counterweight, and it smacked him right in the head. And he was severely wounded, and the wound would never heal. And they found out he had a malignant melanoma, so they amputated his whole ear. And so every photograph you see, he's facing away because he
didn't want to have his
yes.
ear.
But I feel like that inspired him throughout his career to be known for his art. Like he was very disciplined. He had studio hours. He cranked out the artwork his entire life. And so he is probably, of the artists I studied, probably the most professional and probably the best known.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So then there's two more.
Okay, yeah, please.
Hannibal Square, which is a community mural, the one that's on the community center across from the
Outside
Heritage
or inside?
Center. It's outside.
Okay.
It's a mosaic, and it was actually it replaced an earlier painted mural, and then they built it, and they tore down. They built it in sections so it could be removed because it came off the building. The building was replaced, and they put it back up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And members of the community. It was led by Crealdi, which is the art school here in Winter Park.
Right.
And members of the community created all the little tiles and helped put it together. So the person in charge said maybe 500 people worked on this mural. And it's it's Gus Henderson and the two black aldermen who were elected during Reconstruction. And it tells the story of them taking people from Hannibal Square across the train tracks for the election, where they were able to have Winter Park incorporated as a town because of all the black voters who voted for it.
Right, right.
And it's a very important piece. It faces Shady Park. And, with that, I tell the story of the gentrification of Hannibal Square, which is something I never thought I would write about. But in order to
Because
tell
you never thought it would happen, or?
Well, it's, it wasn't, it's something I was living in Central Florida as that was occurring, and I knew it was going on, but I had never studied it.
Okay.
And so this gave me an opportunity. Fairlyn Livingston, who is a great historian, who should be on your podcast if she hasn't been.
Okay.
She wrote extensively about it, and I learned, the dynamics of it, which is fascinating and probably controversial depending on your point of view.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I learned a lot. And then the other one is very close to that, was on the Depew Nursing Home, and it's just a painted mural. And that artist is still around. It was a guy named, I just call him Al C, because his last name I think is Cervellera. And he was 30 years he was a teacher, did very well. He retired, and he got a part-time job working as a receptionist at the Depew Nursing Home. And they asked him to paint a mural. He was a very talented artist this whole time, and he just kind of dabbled in art. But was accomplished. He had little gallery shows and did sidewalk art shows and stuff like that. So he painted this beautiful mural on the side of the building, and they wanted me to include it in the project because they knew the building was going to be demolished. But again, it was one of those wonderful opportunities because I got to learn about Mary Depew, who was this interesting character who moved to Florida with the Kraft family of the Kraft Azalea Gardens fame.
Yes.
They somehow connected in Evanston, Illinois. And what I'm excited about is not much was known about Mary Depew before she moved to Winter Park, and I was able to uncover that she had this really interesting history before she even got here. She met her husband, and they got married in St. Louis. And before that, she was a very well-known teacher in a black school in St. Louis. They moved to Evanston. Her husband attended Fisk University, which is one of those HBCU schools. The Fisk Singers are very well known.
Yep.
And they were very prominent in the Evanston black community, which is a very similar community to Winter Park. And at one point, they entertained Mary McLeod Bethune, who is a well-known civil rights leader from Daytona Beach. They had this, they were kind of rock stars in the black community. And, oftentimes when you read about Mary Lee Depew, she's just talked about as Maud Craft's maid, that Maud helped her start, the Ideal Women's Club and the Depew Nursing Home, but she was kind of a rock star. And that was very satisfying because I think we fleshed out details of her life that hadn't been revealed before.
Rick, you've inspired me. I really, I gotta go find these places. I obviously the one I can't see is the private home, but I'm gonna go check the other ones out.
I'm hoping maybe we could do a tour sometime. We're running out of time because it's about to get hot here, but maybe in the fall we could do a tour. And I'm hoping
of the home, of the one in the home.
Of all of them.
Well, that'd be nice. I like that.
Because they're, the one at Rollins is you can't really access it without Rollins' permission.
Oh, really?
Beautiful.
It's not open to the public.
No.
Just walk. Okay.
No, you can't just walk in and look at it.
Okay.
The other ones you drive by all the time, but it's nice to take a look at it. There's little things like in the Hannibal Square mosaic. There's a person, I talked about Fairleigh Livingston that represents her as a child, and she talks about when she was a kid, they would make dolls out of bottles, and they would just put straw in the bottle for the hair and all that stuff. And there's a little person holding a little bottle, and you can point that out. And the person who organized it from Crowley, she's in Baltimore now, and her name is Lynn Tomlinson. She's, you can look at little details and get lost in the details of the mosaic, but then when you step back and take it all in, it all kind of comes together. So it works on two levels, and I think it's a wonderful piece of art if you take the time to really examine it.
Fascinating. Yeah, and I think the tour would be a great idea because what it would add was, it's easy enough to just at least the ones you can get access to just go by and see them.
Yeah.
But without some context, they probably don't mean as much as you could add if you could add some history to it.
Yeah, I love context, and when I wrote my books before, you get a word count, so you can't go overboard because you get reeled in.
Yeah,
I had no word count on this, so I got to choose what contextual information I wanted to put in. So I go all the way back to cave paintings in Europe to talk about because those are basically the first murals. You're talking about painting on a wall.
Sure.
And there's something I think instinctive. Everybody knows the story of a little kid who takes crayons or magic markers and paints on the wall. It's it's kind of in our DNA just to see a vertical surface and paint on it. And it still exists. And there's a lot of murals, as you drive into town on 1792 or Fairbanks or whatever, there's murals every place. It's just a big thing right now.
Yeah, yeah.
But the historic ones are different. And one of the things I think was most interesting to me is how do you decide which ones to preserve and which ones to let go?
And how do you?
I think Winter Park is unique. They have the ability to save anything they want to.
Okay.
We can cut a house in half and put it on a barge and float it across the lake if we so desire. And I say we, even though I don't live in Winter Park, but that's what's unique about this community. And so I think it's up to the community to decide what's important. And, the one I care about being preserved the most, I think, is the post office mural because it's in really bad shape right now. It's made out of this stone aggregate, and it's starting to come off, and it looks pretty bad. It needs restoration, but it's owned by the federal government, which, the post office is kind of in a strange place right now.
Yeah, sure.
So
does it face on the post? Is it facing New York or facing the parking lot?
There's two.
Okay.
There's one on each side.
Okay.
And then there's this weird thing on the back facing the railroad tracks made out of crushed beer cans that I didn't even go into. Somebody told me it was the same artist, but I don't believe it is.
Yeah.
So next time you're there, take a look. It's just weird.
I will. Yeah. One last question I had about the grant itself. How did you, when you found out about it, is there an application process, or how does that work?
Yeah, I had to do a grant proposal. I never had written one before, and I felt that I was very fortunate to get chosen. And there are a lot of people I admire who have received them before, and to be included in that is a huge honor. I'm on the board of the Winter Park History Museum, and they have this.
Where is that, Rick?
It's in the railroad depot or the farmers market.
Okay, yeah.
And they have
farmers market.
Yeah, and they have an exhibit right now called Echoes, and it's about the history of arts and culture in Winter Park, and that really inspired this because I was involved with helping them do the research and tell that story. And at first it was like, it's such a big story. Rollins was a huge part of that, and how you kind of distill that down into a very small space. And they did a great job of that. That's where my head was, and I wanted to write about the murals and include them as part of that project. Mm-hmm. And this was an opportunity to do a deeper dive. And really, I mean, gosh, I clipped so many articles. There's this thing called newspapers.com where you can see newspapers of the past.
Yeah, I know it. Yeah.
It's a great research tool. And some of these artists, Joy Postal, she did this performance piece called Glamour Birds, where she would perform music and recite poetry, and then draw these wading birds like flamingos and ibis and spoonbills at places like women's clubs and social organizations all over the state, all over the Southeast actually. Mm-hmm. So there's so many accounts of her doing her little act, and there's a photograph I found of her at UCF where she has painted her dress to kind of match the backdrop. She was larger than life. And there's so many articles about that. And she did that here in Winter Park several times. She spoke to the Women's Club, and she did one at Annie Russell.
Okay.
And I think that's her connection. She did, when she performed at Annie Russell, it was a guy named A.J. Hanna, who was a big professor at Rollins. And I think he's the one who invited her to paint the mural at Rollins.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Fascinating. I really can't wait to get out and look at some of this stuff.
Thank you. I it's fun. When you follow the rabbit hole, sometimes it leads really cool places.
Yeah. Rick, before we depart here, how did we get in touch with you? Or how does somebody find you if they want to learn more about you or some of your work?
RickKilby.com. That's my website. All that stuff's on there. The book is currently
Kilby.
Yes, RickKilby.
Okay.
It's currently at the publisher, so I'm fingers crossed they'll have them back by May 2nd.
The books?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm hoping.
So for the presentation?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's exciting. I unfortunately I won't be in town that day, but I will look for other ways to get this.
Yeah, there will be a copy here for sure. Yeah, that's part of the grant.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Do they give out a set number of grants, or just as they desire, or how does it work?
It's an annual thing, and I'm the first one they've awarded since the pandemic, so they took a hiatus for a while. So that's even more of an honor.
Yeah.
And it felt, there's pressure involved with a grant because there is a time limit, but it feels like a responsibility, and I wanted to do right by it.
Very good. Well, Rick, I want to thank you for stopping by and talking to us. I think your work is fascinating. I didn't know much about this, and I have some questions offline after we're done here.
Okay.
I have have you done murals yourself?
No, I have ideas. Someday when I retire, where I live in near Conway, there was a small dairy called Dotson Dairy.
Okay.
Most people haven't heard of it, and so the Dotson House is still there. And I want to do a mural for Dotson Dairy, and they had this great logo. Supposedly their cows would just eat clover, and it made the milk taste better. Mm-hmm. So they had a little clover leaf on the milk cartons or the milk bottles and the caps that went with them. So I want to do a mural for that someday.
Okay, that would be cool.
Yeah,
that'd be cool.
Yeah.
Anything you want to leave us with before we sign off?
I just, I would like to thank Rollins and the library. One of the best things I think is to spend time here and get to know this library, because, I'm 2 miles from the Orlando Library. This place is great. They have a wonderful archives, and it's just alive, and there's people here all the time using this place, and that's what's exciting. I love libraries, I love books, and to see people utilizing this resource all the time in modern, ways with their computers and stuff is very exciting. It's alive. This place is alive.
Right, it really is. I appreciate the commercial.
You're welcome. I believe it, though.
Yeah, no, I know you do. It comes through in the conversation. Well, again, thank you very much for being here, and maybe we'll catch up with you after your presentation.
Okay, great.
All right, thank you, Rick. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Books and Beyond from the Winter Park Library. This podcast would not be possible without the generous help and support from the library staff, and especially from Jeremy Zorn. Jeremy's official title is Public Services Librarian, But he does many things here at the library, including producing this podcast. We can't do this without you, Jeremy. Our theme music is from the song Don't Go by Bovine Joe and the Buffalo Herd. That's Herd spelled H-E-A-R-D. We hope you'll let your friends and others know about this podcast and that you'll come by the library for one of our offerings, which you can find at winterparklibrary.org/events. That's winterparklibrary.org/events. If you have questions or suggestions for the podcast or just want to talk about books and beyond, please send an email to podcast@winterparklibrary.org. That's an email to podcast@winterparklibrary.org. Remember that the Winter Park Library promotes the free and open exchange of ideas and does not attempt to control or take responsibility for any opinions that may be expressed in this podcast. Opinions expressed in this podcast do not constitute or imply an endorsement or a reflection of the library's policies or beliefs. This is Michael Werner, wishing you well until our next episode of Books and Beyond.